Hello, hello. How is everybody today? How are you? And welcome to the Pivot series. I am Riordan O'Connor. I am the community manager at RDI Hub. We still have people joining us at the moment, which is great. So this week we're mixing it up a bit, and we have two fantastic guests joining us. Both masters of remote. We have Tracy Keogh, who is the Grow Remote co-founder, and John Riordan, who is the director of support at Shopify. So you're in for a treat. We were just chatting beforehand, and it'll be a nice chatty session. So we're changing it up a small bit. It won't be as many visual aids. It's very much a conversation. So you're part of this conversation. Thank you for taking the time out to join us, and make sure to chime in at any stage with questions. We'll do a sound check. Is everybody okay? Can you hear me? Like always, you can tell me if you can. Just pop something in the chat and tell me if you can hear me. John and Tracy, maybe if you join as well and just say hello.
Can you hear me? Hello, hello, hello.
Hello.
Great, everyone's here. So hi Nick, hi Darren. Hello Mary, good stuff. Jolene, how you doing? Hiya. Great. Lovely. So we're all sound and good to go. Great. So welcome. So for those of you who have just joined the Pivot series, we've been going for a bit, but it's a series that is powered by RDI Hub. So RDI Hub is an environment for startups and corporates to learn and collaborate together to accelerate growth. So we're based in the Southwest in Ireland, so it's lovely Kerry. And I suppose we're looking at tech firms who are looking for a safe space for their team with like top tech tools like this bad boy behind me here, and great network and mentors and investors to propel you forward. And that's our gig. We also do wellness and innovation programs in the Southwest. So if you are interested, drop me a line. I will put my email in the chat function. So this is your opportunity to connect with a community of thought leaders, and you are in for a treat with these two. We're looking to explore how you reinvent and innovate your business. And the new hybrid way of working will impact businesses and communities and people. It'll impact where businesses kind of set up and who they hire and where they hire. And we're having a chat today, like how do we harness that in the Southwest, that remote working, and to help us shape some beautiful communities for the future. So before we kick off and I hand you over to our two guests, I kind of want to understand where everyone's at the moment. We're in this lockdown a couple of weeks. And I know we did this poll when we started this to look at, like, if you had the choice long term, would you return to an office or would you continue to work remotely? For those of you who have come down from Kerry or Dublin or anywhere and returned to Kerry, or for those of you who just really enjoyed working from home. So if you had the choice in the morning, long term, where would you be? So I'm going to share a poll with you here. It's a Menti poll, and we'll see if this works. Second now. So Menti, basically, if you take out your phone and you just take out your phone and you go to Menti, www.menti.com, and use the code at the top of the screen. Hopefully you can see it. The code is 934827. And the question is, where would you want to work long term? Would you like to return to an office? Would you work remotely long term? And I'm going to give you a few minutes just to think about it and log on to Menti. Good stuff. Okay, we might leave it there. Okay, so we have 20 people who would like 21 and counting, work remotely long term, and we have 8 people who would be interested in returning to the office, which is, so you're looking at people who are on the long-term remote journey, which is really interesting. So with all that in mind, I'm just going to stop sharing this here. Today, like I said, Tracy, Keogh and John Riordan have joined us to talk about how from a remote point of view, what does that mean for rural Ireland? What supports are there for remote worker, and what narrative there needs to be to ensure that remote first is something that will drive rural Ireland. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Tracy first. So Tracy, just give you a little overview of the Grow Remote project, which is a volunteer project, and talk about the supports that are available and that mindset change, and maybe touch on the narrative. Then John will talk about the future of work trends, that hybrid model of work, and that impact it'll have on the community. This is discussion. Chime in at any stage with questions. So Tracy Keogh, co-founder of Grow Remote community project, which is opened up to the regions of Ireland to companies who want to hire remotely. She is a global facilitator at Techstars Startup Weekend, and she currently works in Bank of Ireland to set up their innovation programs in the West. Tracy, am I correct in all of that?
Yes. Sorry, just taking notes there in terms of what I could add in. Thanks a million. Thanks for having us today. So Grow Remote is a community project that is on a mission to enable us to work, live and participate locally. We're mostly interested in living and participating, but we can't do that unless we have our employment locally. So quite some time ago, we formed a bit like the Mehel of old rural Ireland, and we stumbled upon remote work, thought it was a load of hype, got into it, realised it's not a load of hype. And actually, I was working in a co-working space when Shopify opened in 2015 and saw firsthand how it can transform a local community. And so we do that. We achieve our mission by making remote work both visible and accessible in our local communities. We have over 100 chapters to date on no budget in a couple of different countries, because the problem is borderless, the solution is borderless. And we just raised $500,000 from the Enterprise Ireland RDI. So we're kind of transitioning now onto a full-time organisation where we'll actually have resources to do things, which is just beyond exciting. But I suppose the couple of things that we're on at the moment is continuing out ecosystem building, so facilitating community in whatever way we can. Local chapters provide a crucial link in terms of there is no local model for locationless work. So local volunteers come in and educate their local communities and build in local sports. We also have a national training course in remote work in conjunction with the fantastic people in IDA and Solus. We're running that at the moment. We're opening up the conversation around public policy around remote work, because we're hearing so much on it from the community. So we've got a series on that at the moment between people in public policy who know that works, and then people like John who want so much done, and opening up that communication to the wider public. And I guess the last thing is, and I was talking about this earlier on, one-to-one support with companies. So this morning alone, there were 5 different large Irish institutions talking about going remote, and I was trying to calculate it out with Riordan early this morning. I don't know, was that like 30,000 jobs in total if they did do that? Because fundamentally the nub of the problem is in the policies with companies. So we've always been talking to employees, they've always wanted to go remote, but we need the technology, the culture and the policy to change in companies. So we're really in that kind of nuts and bolts of that side of it. And if we can unlock a few, we can get us to the next tipping point, and then we can, as I always think it's smooth sailing from the next milestone, but I probably won't be, but in my head it will be. It'll just be, everything will be put to rights and employment will be everywhere and we'll be fine. That's
positive. That's, optimistic is very, very important, really, isn't it? And just on a little bit on John as well. John is currently the director of Spotify in Ireland. He's the former director of sales and services in Apple. He's VP of, he was VP of international at Arise. And full disclosure, he's also on the board of Grow Remote. So I suppose, John, we had a very good conversation, myself and John, around the future trends of work and how they will impact businesses and how they hire and kind of how it has been working for Shopify. And I think that's first and foremost, share your knowledge with the audience, John.
Okay. First thing, thanks very much for inviting me, Riordan. I'm very disappointed to tell you that I don't work for Spotify. I work for Shopify. The one thing I don't say Spotify, and Riordan says Spotify. Anyway, every time you said, Tracy and I just burst out laughing because we could see you reading your notes. But anyway, no problem at all. I'm well used to it. So a couple of years, Shopify's been in Ireland about 5 years, and we're one of the kind of more interesting stories because we're a 100% remote company. So we're kind of on the lunatic left wing fringe of remote work, but I don't think that should be in any way, should put off any of the folks who are on today, any of the participants today, because I think that, there's a lot of stuff that we're doing that can open people's eyes as to how things can happen. So Tracy alluded to a situation about 5 years ago where she was working in Galway and suddenly saw a bunch of folks walking in with this S logo on a sweatshirt, Shopify logo, and wondering who the hell are these people? And that's sort of how Shopify started in Ireland. We started with what I call a low risk strategy, which was putting a group of people into a classroom in Galway, because it was felt if this went pear-shaped, it would be easier if everybody was in the one location so we could recover. So, that just showed that we had a plan B, which was, we're going to try to do this and do it really well. But if it doesn't work, at least people will all be living in the Galway area. Suffice to say, it was a raging success. And the 50 people that we started off with in Ireland in June, exactly this time 5 years ago, I think we're a week away from our 5-year anniversary. And that 50 people is now over 400. And we still have no office. We have no intentions of having an office. We have no desire to have an office. And it's all it's all working beautifully. And we started with, a classic comment would be, oh yeah, that's kind of simple. It's customer support work. It's fairly easy to do. Yeah, that could be something that some folks might think. But the interesting thing is we started with 2 jobs, which were customer support and then customer support lead. Let's call that really one job type. We now have 47 different jobs in Ireland. So what actually happens is you have this mushroom cloud that builds up over time. And we've seen this routinely in many other industries over the course of the last 25, 30 years in Ireland. When you start with customer support, what actually happens is a lot of folks in Ireland gravitate towards the company and the brand. The company or the brand sees the caliber of the talent that they get, and then they bring more and more jobs. And that's exactly what we're trying to accomplish with Grow Remote as well. Once people see folks working remotely and they see the level of productivity that it brings, you suddenly have large institutions who have been resolute in not wanting to embrace radical change, suddenly realizing, hang on, we can't hold back the tide. And oh my God, people have been doing this and they've been very successful for the last couple of months. So that's what we've got to capitalize on now over the course of the next 6 months, is the companies who have seen that the tide has changed and they're kind of scrambling right now and looking to find out how to do it. And Tracy stressed an incredibly important point, which is the role of peers in this setup. There are quite a number of companies that many folks won't have heard of that are in Ireland that are remote. And there are leaders in many of those companies. And one thing that is very clear about folks who are leading organizations in the remote sphere, almost every one of them is willing to share the faults and failings, because it's in our interest as an industry, both to grow the talent pool of remote workers, but also this is a huge green jersey play. This is going to be, this is the rural electrification of our generation. It really is. It's probably the most important thing that we could possibly do in our work careers, is to be the group of people who are helping change the very nature of work in Ireland. So I couldn't be more excited with what's happening right now. And I have no idea, Riordan, if that even answered your question, because I totally forgot what your question was.
That's absolutely fine. No, it does. I suppose one of the things for me is you're a dab hand at this. You've been doing it a long time in Shopify. How do you do it? Like give us 3 things that really make remote working work for you.
The most important thing to start off with is trust. I think the trust barrier, I hope, got exploded about 3 or 4 weeks after this whole COVID-19 pandemic started. So I think it was early April. I saw a report. I believe it was IBEC. Tracy may well correct me on this. And they announced that the average Irish worker who's now working from home was working 7 to 8 hours a week more than before and was being more productive. I mean, right there and then, within 3 or 4 weeks, we blew the sound barrier apart. That proves indefatigably that when folks are in the comfort of their own home and they have the right tools and the right products, that the level of productivity and the output, which is the most important thing to measure, not whether somebody shows up, not whether they go for a drink with you on Friday night, not if they're a nice person to go for lunch with, their output. And if that output has increased, we're there. And so that's number one thing. Focus on trust. Focus on trust, and you'll get it. You'll get it in terms of output. There's a guy, Daniel Pink, great writer, who wrote a book called Drive, and he talks about the 3 most important things, which are autonomy. You give people autonomy, and you're going to get it back in spades. And in fact, one of the things that he says, and it's really an important thing for us all as leaders, is if you go for control, if that's your method of leadership or your method of management, what you're going to get coming back is compliance. So control breeds compliance. Autonomy and trust breed engagement. So if you give people the opportunity to do their best work, what you're going to get is both really good work, and also you're going to get people who will follow your leadership. And I would call, control really is management, and it gives compliance. Autonomy is leadership, and it brings engagement. So like that whole point of trust and autonomy are important. Second point is connection. You have to have an ongoing flow of connections, as in every single day we have Zoom calls or Google Meets calls. We communicate more with the people that we work with at Shopify. We actually know more about our people than we would know if we were in an office. One of the surveys I saw recently are that there's actually been greater loneliness in office settings than there have been in home settings, right? And open plan offices, by their very nature, funnily enough, have a lesser impact in terms of dedicated work, let's call it the Zen state of work, because people want to go behind closed doors in an office to put the head down and get something done. I operate in heads down mode all the time. I don't have distractions. So that's a very important point. So those points of communication, I'm going to leave it at 2: trust and communication.
Perfect, great. Trust and communication. So if we take nothing else out of today, they're the 2. Tracy, I want to come back to you on that like potential 30,000 jobs. And I've quoted this a couple of times, that if you take away location as a blocker for a job, you open it up, and what that does for our communities will be something fairly special. Yeah, I just want to look at that 30,000. When we talked beforehand about the narrative that needs to be controlled in a way, if possible, or shaped to ensure that we can make it safe for people to return home, rural.
So first things first, I'm going to post in a thing, because first thing is our mindset in our communities. The jobs are already here. John tells a story often of him being in Tralee with us in 2018. He got up and he spoke all about remote work, and then people came up to him afterwards, and they were like, "Can you bring your jobs to our town? Like, can you bring them?" And he's like, "No, that's not what this is." And I suppose it was then up to us to sit down with the communities and say, look, Shopify are never going to open up in Abbeyfield. They're never going to open up in Tralee. They will always be fully distributed. And so the problem is that, again, there's no local model for locationless work. Shopify are not going to even really advertise jobs where you'd normally see them advertised in the shop or wherever in our local communities. And that's why local chapters step in and do that job. we're not paid to advertise the job. We do it anyway. And a guy in our community saw this problem and built a jobs board. And I'm not sure, there's maybe 200 and something jobs there. And again, that's just crowdsourced by the community, and they're available anywhere. And I'll share in another link for a website called Remote Hub, and you can see all of the companies that will give you a co-working stipend as well as working remotely. So for me, the first thing is remote work is never going to land in our communities unless it's a satellite office, which is a slightly different thing, and we welcome all forms of employment, by the way. But in Grow Remote, we focus on one. So we need to spend a little bit of time understanding the likes of Doist, eBay, Shopify, Wayfair, Scraping Hub, Nearform, and get to know them as well as we know, say, in Kerry, Fexco. And that's why local communities matter, because you get to meet these people in person. But then on a wider piece, I told a story on Twitter a couple of weeks ago that a recruiter was on a phone call to her about kind of making jobs more visible, and she said, yeah, I was out your way recently. I'm just wondering, like, where do all these people work? Because you don't have any internet. I was like, no, we have internet. So I think that there's a whole narrative to rural Ireland that you can move here if you want to compromise everything. And that's not the case. Like, we were in a school in Armore doing schools talk. And we were like, why would you go work for a company that makes you work in Dublin? Would you not want to work for GitLab? You get or Doist, you get 40 days paid annual leave, and you can work in Dublin, you can work in Armore, you can work in Berlin, and that's far more exciting. So actually, you shouldn't be compromising while living here. So then on to, I guess, the piece around companies. I think it's a separate piece again. I think that traditionally when communities were going into companies, and I was one of these people, you would go in and you would be like, look, we built this hub in the Burn. Can you come? Great quality of life. I remember one, she was actually in the Burn, had a brilliant pack for the employees of one company. They had like a year's free in the gym, 2 years free in the golf course, 5 days free in the hotel, to all this kind of stuff. And the company was like, why are you sending this to us? We do not care about the Burn. I could understand two sides, the commercial side that they're looking at, and also the community side. Like, how could you not care? Like, that's ridiculous. So for us, it was really important to speak to companies with their own language. So we started using talent acquisition and retention, which went away, but it didn't actually go too far, even when we were at full employment. Then we started using business continuity, and now we're using cost reduction. So as we say, you can use remote as a lever to achieve any strategic goal. And what we're seeing now actually is that companies wanted to do this for ages, just they didn't have the time, they didn't really know, it was very noisy, didn't know what to do. And now they're trying to bed in the behaviors that were done through COVID. And that's where we're seeing, okay, we're going to transition all remote. Nobody's speaking publicly about it yet. And what I want is for a company to come out in the next month, 2 months, and say publicly, we're going to transition. We know this is going to be difficult. We're going to share our learnings along the way, like John said, and then that will take us to the next stage. And then if they do that, I suppose in my head, I can visibly imagine going on to Indeed and seeing all the jobs there without any specific location, but within the Republic of Ireland. And that brings psychological safety that we need to get people to move home, which we call the last mile of remote.
Tracy, if you remember one of the conversations we had in the last week, there's a particular large multinational that recently posted a director of remote job.
Yeah.
And the job is located in their company headquarters.
Yes, but that's fine, John. John and I disagree on this one. So we're working with companies on the transition, right? And it is hard. And what companies need to do is meet the company where they're at. So that person does need to be in San Francisco so they can work to change it again from the nub of the problem, which is in the office. So I can understand that.
And we will always disagree, which is one of the reasons why I'm on the board with Tracy, because I'm the grumpy old shit on the board, which is fine. So, yeah, but there's tons and tons of things that we can do. But I think Tracy addressed one really, really important point there, and just kind of glanced by it when you mentioned Aaron Moore and schools and people coming out of school. There's a massive opportunity for us, okay? And that opportunity it's so current. We've now had a cohort of, I don't know, maybe... let's talk 4th, 5th, and 6th year students. So you're talking about, if my mathematics is correct, about 200,000 students who have who've gone through, let's say, remote education for the last 3 or 4 months. These people are going to be heading into the workforce over the course of the next couple of years. Some of them may well be doing college remotely next year. Okay, these folks are going to have a very different view of what work is like. And what we need to do as a community, and what we need to do as a group of organizers, is we need to really normalize what working from home is. And one of the things I would encourage people to think, remote work gives a connotation that you are away from the center, that you're out on the corner of the earth. Like, I'm actually out in the Mizzen Head right now, so I do feel like I'm in the corner of the earth. But you're away from everything. But so remote work actually doesn't necessarily give the full connotation. What we are a group of people who are very professional at working from home. So what I'd like, from an education perspective, what we need to talk about is, over the course of the next year, is a significant professionalization of work from home. And I think we're seeing that now, as a lot of companies are coming out saying, yes, we're really now looking at or moving towards work from home. We see companies who are now giving their employees a stipend to professionalize their whole work, their work setting. You probably notice I'm using a standing desk, which is from a company called Pop Desk, which is a Donegal-based company that only started in the last couple of months. Very, very important that we understand that you can actually professionalize your workspace for a relatively small sum of money. So we need to normalize working from home, and we need to get with the task of professionalizing. Now, there's one other aspect of this, very important point that's been mentioned by a few senior people in companies that are fairly woke in the whole remote space, is CEOs saying, one thing we need to understand is that the tools that we're using right now, they're the worst tools we will ever have in terms of working from home. Because up to now, the developers have been focused on other stuff, and there's now this incredible focus on all of the tools for work from home. Another example of how the focus has changed is in talking to two individuals who work for, it's a total tangential point, but it'll come back, two different individuals who work for building, for home builders in Ireland. And I spoke to both the two friends of mine within about 2 weeks of kind of the March 12th move home. And both of them said to me separately that their planners and their architects were actually changing home drawings within the first 2 weeks, because people were calling them saying, you know, that fourth bedroom for that new home that you were building, we want to move that towards being more of an office. Or the shed that we were talking about, we're looking at that now as an office. This infrastructural change is happening right now, and we need to get with the program. And the fact that folks are here to listen today, I don't think we need to evangelize for those folks, but my ask is of all of the participants today is take up the mantra of this and talk about working from home and normalize it in your communities, and start with the 15, 16-year-olds and normalize. This isn't a freak show any longer. This was a freak show 4 or 5 years ago. It's not anymore. This is an incredibly important thing from an economy perspective. And one last point in this is that, having attended a few of the Grow Remote every Grow Remote function in the last couple of years, because Tracy wouldn't accept it if I didn't show up. What's really interesting is that you don't actually have to invite politicians to go to these things. They come as attendees. That's how important our politicians are showing up at these events, because they know this is coming, and all of them want to be part of this. And this is crossing all party boundaries. All right. There is a huge momentum in government, in all aspects of government, whatever the government is going to be, to get this right. And it's going to hit on all of the major elements in our government policy, whatever that government is and whatever that policy is.
Actually, Mary asked a question, and it's a very valid one, is that there was only 2 options in the Menti poll, which is one work from home and one go back to the office, right? And she's kind of saying, like, I want another option. I want a mix. I want the option to have space for events and meetings and a collaboration space. Yep. And it's finding that happy medium.
I think language is a big barrier to remote work in general. So in terms of accessing jobs and everything. But there was another conversation in a corporate this week around the language, and they did not like the term remote work, which a lot of people don't. They prefer distributed. They didn't like it work from home, and they settled upon, was it a choice and location agnostic? So you pick it up. But we can see that within the toolkits that organizations are building, there's a work from home stipend, and without failure, they are putting in co-working stipends, and I haven't had one pushback to a co-working stipend that I thought we would have in terms of, well, I'm not sure about security and this, that, and the other.
Yes.
So that is there, and I think it would form a big part. I got a really kind of risk-averse person on a call this morning, and they were saying, well, working from home, broadband, we need a contingency plan, we need resilience, and hubs are that resilience too. So they should be baked in at every point. But also, I think that there is a very unique opportunity for hubs at this exact moment. So corporate offices haven't opened up, obviously, completely because they still have social distancing, but hubs are open. And so now is the time when people are begging to get out of their homes, myself included. I would go anywhere. I'll go back into an office with loads of people, to get to have them cross the front door of the hub once.
Mm-hmm.
And in my experience in running co-working spaces, if you get people in, they get it, but they need to feel it, they need to see it, and then once they do it once, they're like, oh yeah, and then they come back all the time.
So can I just jump into that point, Riordan, because I think it's a really important issue. There's been a ton of surveys and probably the most important body of academic work that's been done about remote work was a study done by Stanford University on a Chinese company called C-Trip, and it was done in 2013. What they did was they took 1,000 agents and they moved 1,000 agents to work from home for this company. And they had 1,000 agents working at home and a similar cohort of 1,000 people working in an office. And they tracked them over the course of a year. And what they found was productivity went up and absenteeism went down. And it was about a 15% jump in productivity. Now, the interesting thing was, and funnily enough, a lot of the stuff that we're seeing now and some of the stuff I cited earlier on are showing numbers in and around that. Another thing that they did is they asked at the end, what would you like to do? And very interestingly, there was a group of people, and it was in around the 20-25% of people said, I love this remote working thing. This is what I want to do. About 20-25% of people said, I hate this work from home thing. I don't want to do it. I can't wait to get to the office. And then you had a group in the middle of in and around the 50% mark who said, it's kind of interesting. I like the ability to be able to work from home, but I also like the ability to go to an office. And that's the hybrid group. So from a co-working space, that hybrid group should be the most invigorating and exciting thing that's come out of this, because you're going to see of the 28,000 people who drive in from Kildare into Dublin every day, the 31,000 who drive in from Meath, I think 29,000 who drive in from, I can't remember, it's a Wicklow or every day. It's crazy. There's an opportunity for a variety of different kind of satellite offices or hub or co-working spaces to actually give people the opportunity to get out of their house and for a day or two or a couple of hours and actually go work somewhere else for a period of time and not be cooped up in your home office or your showroom or whatever it is. And that's where these hub spaces are going to be fantastic. And to me, the demise of WeWork, which was self-imposed as well, we all get that. But I think WeWork would have actually really struggled in this world because it was all about the commute into an office space, when really the issue is, take those jobs out. Take those jobs out of the congested spaces, the locations, take out of those congested spaces and move them into a little bit more of an accessible place. Now that's going to have an enormous impact on small and middle-sized towns in Ireland. So what I think what we're going to see is the rise of the town again. It's going to be quite significant. It's going to take a while, and it's going to take some big calls by big companies in Ireland to say it is okay for you not to be in the office. But some of them will say, look, we'd like you to be in every now and then, But if every now and then means 4 days a week they're working either from home or in their kind of home environment, to me that's a boon, huge shot in the arm for co-working spaces. And the smaller ones and the local ones, I think, are going to do equally well. They're going to really benefit from this.
Okay, so if anybody else has any questions, please chime in.
I'm going to post in something in the chat group there,
do.
because I just saw yesterday a tweet that we tweeted out, we retweeted, and rents in San Francisco have already dropped something like 9% year on year. Because obviously that leadership, a lot of it is happening from San Francisco in terms of letting jobs go anywhere. So you can already track the impact in that city. So I think that's really interesting, because obviously, as we say, like, that is the last mile, is getting people to move back, because but we need the policies in place before that could happen.
Okay, I have a question from Owen here, just around that rural electrification, and I'm going to bring him up to ask it if you want to ask, Owen, and feel free to say no as well.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I've been working remotely for 4 years now, and it's great to see other people now finally empathizing with us remote workers. A very interesting discussion, and you kind of validate some. The question I had was about rural electrification, and I think it's an interesting analogy for broadband and what I call economic fairness across the country, and it's something for our policymakers to consider. I was just wondering, the question I wanted to pose was, will future generations look back and say that 3 billion was only a small investment of what was actually required to facilitate that nationwide remote working?
Yes, absolutely. Unquestionably, yes. But I'm going to also put a caveat on this one on. I don't know this to be the case, but I'm pretty sure if you look at the press clippings in the 2 months prior to COVID-19 and the first couple of months afterwards, there was more talk in the press before this about the National Broadband Plan and poor broadband than after March the 12th. And that's just my spidey sense. I might be wrong. But what I noticed from the folks that I'm heavily involved with from a remote working perspective, people got on with it, okay? They just got on with it. And I saw very little public beatings and public bleatings about broadband post March the 12th. I saw a lot of them before that. I am also aware that there's significant impetus in many of the government structures to press the fast forward button so that we're going to get this better and faster. And your point about economic fairness is incredibly important. I'm currently working with an employee who is actually choosing where to live in Ireland based upon broadband. So this is an employee who's not Irish, who loves Ireland, thinks it's a great place. And the two things in mind for them are cost of living and access to broadband. And that should be music to the ears of small towns who are willing to become a more accessible and amenable and friendly place, and also wrap it in with good services, as in a co-working space, good broadband. So hopefully on the advent or the spending of this 3 billion will be seen as a drop in the bucket by the generations who I talked about earlier on, who are in 4th, 5th, and 6th year in school and in the first couple of years in college. I genuinely hope that they are the ultimate beneficiaries long after us. And I hope to God that the history books in schools in 15 years' time will talk about the enormous benefits that accrue to the country on the basis of this awful last couple of months.
Does that answer your question, on?
Yeah, that's great. I think some of the technology that's there will depend on huge broadband speeds that we may not have even factored in right now. So I think we can't have enough high-speed broadband, in my opinion. So,
Owen, I've been working all week this week, as I said, from Mizzen Head. I'm about as remote as you can get, and I am using a bog standard, simple Huawei 4G dongle, and I have got 6 devices in the house running off it at the moment. And I've been on conference calls all week long, and I've had almost the exact same experience as having a wired connection in my home office in Cork with a 200 gig, supposedly 200 gig connection. So it can be done. It really, like the basics of doing the job. Let's not, sorry, just one quick tangential point. Let's not get wrapped around the axle about the 5% of jobs where there's a significant bandwidth required to do heavily technical and heavily creative stuff. Let's focus on the 95% of stuff, and I'm making wild sweeping statements here, of the stuff that can be done very easily with low bandwidth. And I think that's one of the most important things. If we get wrapped around the axle on the 5%, we're missing the big story.
There's a concept, asset-based community development, that I love. And I realize that we do after the fact. But that's always how I realize it. We do first, and then we hear there's a word for it or a term for it. And one of the things that frustrates me often is that, and we get in Twitter a lot, well, we need broadband first. And GitLab hire all across Ireland, Wayfair, Shopify, all automatic hire all across Ireland. Their talent acquisition person is in Westport. They're hiring 30 roles now, I have to say. But so definitely work needs to be done there. But if you take the analogy of electrification, it's like giving the ability for electricity, but not, people don't know where the light bulbs are. People don't know where the switch is. And we need to put in an awful lot more around that, around education and building up awareness. So we can work with what we have. Kieran Conlon, who is the VP of Public Policy head of Public Policy for Microsoft, put it well. He said, broadband isn't the magic bullet. Even in areas where there's high-speed connection, we haven't solved everything. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done in tandem. Broadband's definitely one of those pieces, but it's not a piece that we need to do first and then the rest will happen.
Okay, lovely. I have a question from Liz asking around, what do you guys think local authorities can do? What can they do to help bring jobs to rural towns? And I think that's a question that you're going to be asked all the time. What can you do to bring jobs to local towns? And the same with the RDI. Their function is going to change now, because it won't be about, bringing in jobs to local towns. How can we reshape that question? And then what do local authorities, what part do they play in all of that?
I think the RDI are doing fantastic work. I think, if you look at remote in Ireland, Shopify, Wayfair, they did roadshows with eBay. They are putting in the heavy lifting, and they're really understanding the nuances of the problems.
Yep.
Like us all, there's loads more that we can do, and it's moving very fast, and we need to keep up and all of that. But I think that they're doing really fantastic work. And then I forgot local authorities.
What role? The local authorities, how can they help to bring jobs?
One interesting thing that I heard this week that Clare County Council are doing is they have a whole amount of infrastructure for tourism, and an awful lot of what you need for tourism is actually what you need to attract people back to the town. So maybe not so employers, but they're looking at refocusing the people who are based on tourism at now those people who work, instead of attracting tourists, they'll attract people to come and live and work in Clare. And to me, that is just perfect. And I put in a thing for Community Finder, and they're going to use that to help people kind of navigate Clare. But if you can imagine like a concierge service for County Clare, and you'd ring up and you'd say, I want to move home, I want to move to Clare, but I really want to be beside, and this is a real life story, a tennis court, because my daughter is big into tennis and I want to nurture that in her. The person says, oh, Kilkee. I use the story all the time as well of Deirdre and Dingle, and the amount of houses that she has got for people who are moving to the area who never make it to the market. Yeah. Because she just knows the community. And so I think there's a little bit of re-angling current supports that are there away from tourism, not totally away from tourism, but on from tourism and into living and working. But I think for our hardest hit towns, they're in a self-perpetuating downward cycle, where it's hard to attract employers because you look like you're dying, and the whole narrative around it is quite bad. But if you want to attract somebody home, they won't see a dying town. They'll feel nostalgia and they'll see potential and they'll want to make change, and it's a completely different sell. So I think that's one thing definitely that local authorities can do. I think mostly they're supporting hubs, and John might have more ideas.
Yeah, if we sit and wait for local authorities and for other agencies to do something, I think we're going to end up sitting and waiting for a long time. And that's no slam at all on governments or local authorities. This needs to be one person at a time. Somebody who works in our organization called Mary Rose Simpson, who's from Stradbally in County Laois, who is quite devastated that she's one of the only people of her generation from Stradbally who's now back living in Stradbally, but she's working remote for Shopify and building a career. And she's making it a mission of hers to encourage as many of the folks of her generation back to Stradbally. That to me is as important as anything that the Laois County Council can do. This is a one-by-one, town-by-town initiative where, towns need to continue to make themselves attractive places to live. It starts with pride, it starts with the tidy towns concept, it starts with welcoming every single person into the community. It starts with diversity and inclusion and a whole ton of very, very simple things that don't require a grant, they don't require a local councillor doing anything. The days of waiting for a local councillor or a TD or somebody from the IDA to come and cut a ribbon on a concrete box outside your town that's going to deliver 100 jobs, those days are long gone. They're with O'Leary in the grave. This is one by one, town by town, and everybody has a role to play.
Actually, on the age thing, and it's quite interesting, and Frank has a question, and Frank, feel free to come up if you're willing, and reject if you don't. And you're on mute, Frank. Oh, there you go.
I'm live. No, I'm
You're live, Frank.
Live. So my question was, I was talking with a mate of mine in San Francisco yesterday, and he's looking at never filling up his office building again. And our discussion was around younger people. I'm not a younger person, I'm an ancient person. But, and that it's so much part of the working life for a young person to be in an office and to do all the things other than push paper, but all the socialization that goes on in the office, the serendipity, blah, blah, blah. Are we, by encouraging people to go straight from school or straight from college to remote work, are they missing out on something, ingredient X, that they would get if they went to work in an office?
I can jump in and take that one, Frank. Couple of things.
I can tell you're just bouncing from side to side.
He's ready and waiting.
He's ready, yeah.
We all bring our biases into discussions, okay? And one of the biases that we bring is, young people are comfortable with tech and older people aren't. And what I've seen over the course of the last 10 years is that that's not actually the case. Another bias that we could potentially bring in is that young people want to gravitate towards the cities and have that experience living away from home and doing this and that. But guess what? It's probably because we did that ourselves. And we always try to reflect back and expect the next generation to do roughly what we did, okay? Now, I'm going to go look at this evidence-based. I look at the age split of companies like Shopify, and we would skew, let's put it this way, Frank, considerably younger than me. Okay? Right. They don't call me granddad for nothing. Okay? So it does skew considerably younger. But there's a very interesting thing as well, is when I go and talk to these folks, many of whom are in their second or third job, they will routinely say, unsolicited, they will say, I know more about my team at Shopify, the individuals on my team at Shopify, than it's a richer experience, and I have a more knowledgeable experience of everybody in my team, more so than when I actually worked in an office. So there's a bit of a misnomer that if you're not around people, you're less social and less socialized. Very important distinction. So I would, and I'm not in any way saying, Frank, you're a biased individual, but I think we all bring our lifetime of biases into some of these assumptions, and we ask the question as if, don't you think that, isn't this the way because that's the way I grew up? And I think we just need to step back a little bit and be very vulnerable and be very open-minded about how we look at this.
But Frank, to say that, I was just talking to somebody about an accountancy firm. So there's couple of accountancy practices who are looking at it, and the one reason they're afraid of the trainees is because of that thing around the intake of trainees. And I remember it because I tried to be a trainee for an accountant for a year, but you go to Dicey's on a Thursday night and you're back in and work on Friday, and it was part of the whatever, and that's how a lot of couples got together. There's people married out of that cohort and everything. But I think actually if we're a bit more imaginative, I think that communities will form in different ways. So I think that, you know, people will find their prayer group where they're going out and having fun and doing all that in person, just maybe more local to them and not necessarily their work colleagues. So I think we will never take away the human interaction, physical human interaction. That would be a very sad thing if that did happen. I just think that that will form in different ways. And fundamentally though, Frank, it's about choice. So if people want to go work in an office, go work in an office. Like, we're not here to tell you what to do, but you should have the choice to be able to not work there if you don't want to.
Does that answer your question, Frank?
Yeah. And I think the hybrid thing is probably a way to deal with that, where you're being more sort of deliberate about creating your community that can be, as you say, everyone doesn't have to wear the same t-shirt, but at least they're aware that there's other people out there that they can bounce.
And Frank, most remote companies go away twice per year. Like, there's one company who brings them on a yacht for 1 week, twice per year. Now, you could get an awful lot done, you know, there. So I think, like, in terms of all that, they won't be missing out on a lot sometime. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Cool. Thanks. Okay, guys, I'm conscious of time, so I think we're going to have to wrap things up. But first of all, I just want to say thank you to my guests, Tracy Keogh and to John Riordan from Shopify and Tracy Keogh from Grow Remote. Just a big thank you. They were excellent speakers. Next week in the Pivot series, we're going to be joined by Daryl Mann, who is a professor of innovation, author, and he's going to talk about all things innovation, so how you embed innovation systematically into your culture. But I just want to thank our guests and to thank the participants as well. There were some fantastic questions and a really good conversation. I think that for myself anyway, it changes my perspective a little bit. And I also know that I kind of have to watch my narrative, that we're so used to saying, like, come down to Kerry, it's so beautiful. We need to switch that in its head a little bit and talk about the talent and the people that are here and the opportunities for organizations, which I think is an interesting one. But thank you very much.
Do you mind if I just jump in?
John's going to do the closing statements.
One quick thing that we didn't talk about, folks, is mental health. Okay, it's a very important part of remote work. It's a different experience. It's not for everybody. And the companies that are successful at doing it start by talking openly about mental health, because the walls can close in around you very, very quickly. And if anybody's thinking about doing this, have that very open discussion from day one with folks, and be very attuned to the signs of people becoming a little bit irritable and lacking that piece of connection. But that's a richer conversation that could take half an hour, so maybe another day.
Yeah, and I think that's really important for everybody now. There's no one that hasn't been touched a little bit by this stressful environment. Thank you very much, guys, and we'll see you all again next week. Bye.
Bye.